Aviator Charles Lindbergh Sr. was the most famous man in the world, having been the first person to fly solo and non-stop across the Atlantic. In 1932, the nearly 2-year-old Charles "Charlie" Lindbergh was kidnapped from his home in Hopewell, New Jersey. The mystery of what happened to him and who was behind it drew worldwide attention and remains an area of fascination for many, right into the modern era. Today, we're going to take a look at the haunting circumstances around the infamous Lindbergh baby kidnapping. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what other historical crime stories you would like to hear about. Okay, let's take a look back at the mysterious case of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. Initially, the New Jersey State Police believed the kidnapping had to be an inside job. And right off the bat, they found it suspicious that the kidnapper knew the exact location of the baby's room. The Lindberghs' home was new, and parts of it were still under construction when the kidnapping occurred. The family had not even officially moved in, and at that point, they were only spending weekends there. But the kidnapping happened on a Tuesday evening, and who else but someone on the inside would know that the family remained after the weekend due to the baby's bad cold. According to Anne Morrow Lindbergh, the only people who knew were her own parents and one of her parents' housemaids, who often cared for the baby. The only other people who knew the family's whereabouts that evening were little Charlie's nanny and the Lindbergh butler, who were themselves inside the house. Police immediately noted that the baby's nursery had been wiped clean of fingerprints, even those that should have been there, including those of the baby and his parents. As the case evolved over the next few days, police and other investigators determined that Charles Lindbergh was maintaining control of the investigation and may have ordered the cleaning of the crime scene. One of the more eerie Lindbergh baby circumstances concerns the fate of Lindbergh household servants. Until the sole official suspect, Bruno Richard Hauptmann, was arrested, authorities rigorously and repeatedly questioned members of the Lindbergh household staff. Chief among these was Violet Sharp, a woman who was in the employ of Anne Lindbergh's parents as a housemaid. Since Anne, Charles, and their baby were not only frequent visitors to the Morrow home, but were actually also living there while their new home was built, Sharp was regularly pressed into the service of caring for the Lindbergh baby. Indeed, Sharp was one of only a very few who knew that the family would remain at the new home prior to the baby's disappearance. And this is why she was at the top of the police suspect list. Sharp was called in for questioning twice, and neither was a pleasant experience. Police were under enormous pressure to solve the crime and return the child. After all, this was Lucky Lindy's baby, and the entire world was watching. The department's reputation was on the line. Under the circumstances, their questioning was often brutal. Sharp, for her part, didn't help her case by lying to the police about her whereabouts on the night in question. And when the baby's remains were discovered and she was questioned again, she became agitated and very upset. The police called her in yet again for questioning, but they never got the chance. Sharp was found dead, having taken a fatal dose of cyanide. The Lindbergh's butler, Oliver Whateley, who was one of the 5 people present the night of the kidnapping, was also repeatedly questioned by the police. He died very suddenly of peritonitis the following year. Focus on the homemade ladder used in the kidnapping began on the very night of the crime. Though crudely made, it was evident that its creator possessed carpentry and mechanical skills, since the ladder was designed to expand as needed and retract into an easily carried compact piece. First checked for fingerprints, then compared with the scuffs on the windowsill outside the nursery, the wood used to construct the ladder was an important clue for authorities. A Forest Service expert named Arthur Koehler was summoned to inspect the materials. He disassembled the ladder and inspected each piece of wood, every chisel mark, and every nail hole. He concluded that several distinct types of wood had been sourced to build the ladder, including one wood that was designed for use in indoor construction. Koehler traveled to wood factories and processing centers to make comparisons, as well as comparing wood sources at the homes of the Lindberghs, their family, and friends. Koehler's meticulous efforts would prove useful later on in the case. When Bruno Richard Hauptmann was arrested due to his possession of numbered banknotes from the ransom, Koehler had a new source to compare with his findings. High in Hauptmann's home attic, he discovered a plank of wood that was a perfect match to a plank used to construct the kidnapper's ladder. That being said, not all experts agree that this was evidence of Hauptmann's guilt, claiming that the wood in question was purposefully planted in the attic to implicate Hauptmann. Though they look more like a torture device than a training tool to the eyes of people today, thumb guards were commonly used in the early 20th century to discourage young children from sucking their thumbs. Little Charlie was among those children who were put to bed each night with metal guards placed over their thumbs. The guards were attached to a strong string or metal chains, which were secured to a crib rail, one on each side. Placed that way, a child could move about to a point, but was physically unable to bring either thumb to the mouth. Most accounts of the kidnapping make no mention of Charlie's thumb guards. But it was nearly 1 month after the crime, his nanny, Betty Gow, discovered a thumb guard exactly like Charlie's, crushed in the driveway leading away from the Lindbergh home. The location of the discovery was problematic for Lindbergh and the police, as their investigation already concluded that footprints in the grass and mud, along with pieces of the ladder, marked the kidnapper's path, a path that headed in precisely the opposite direction from the location of the thumb guard. Questions concerning the contradictory evidence were never addressed and remain one of the stranger aspects of the disappearance. At the time of his son's kidnapping, Charles Lindbergh was one of the most famous men in the world, a premier aviator, and a hero to people around the globe. In fact, it's not a stretch to say that the general public considered him above reproach. While his friends and family also respected him, they were privy to other aspects of his personality that were not so positive. Lindbergh was a notorious practical joker. Sometimes these jokes took the form of gentle teasing, but often his so-called jokes were cruelly intended to frighten the recipient. Chief among his targets was his wife, Anne. In fact, when baby Charlie was discovered missing from his crib, the baby's nanny, Betty Gow, immediately approached Lindbergh and asked if he had taken the baby as part of a prank on his wife. According to her handwritten statement, Gow claimed she suspected Lindbergh of yet another practical joke, since she knew he had taken the baby and hidden him before. According to authors Gregory Ahlgren and Stephen Monier, Gow was referring to an incident that took place only 2 months before the kidnapping. On this occasion, Lindbergh had hidden the child in a closet. He then sent his wife and the household into a panic by telling them the boy had been kidnapped. Another side of Charles Lindbergh's personality and interests that remained hidden during his lifetime had to do with his enthusiasm for eugenics. Or, for those that don't know, it is the theoretical use of biology and breeding to produce a superior human race. Lindbergh considered himself in possession of such superlative genes, and he was an early supporter of Hitler's eugenics program. Later in life, Lindbergh even pursued German women with the express purpose of uniting his own genes with those of a similar background. He fathered several children this way, along with the family he had with his wife Anne. So, how does eugenics connect with Lindbergh's possible involvement in his first son's disappearance? Well, when he was just 20 months old, little Charlie had trouble standing on his own, and some of his toes overlapped. Concerns about his health and a possible diagnosis of rickets meant that the little boy was given large daily doses of vitamin D and napped under a sun lamp. To his father's mind, such conditions pointed to inferior genetics. Additionally, Anne Lindbergh's sister, Elizabeth Morrow, suffered from mental illness for much of her life. Lindbergh was aware of Elizabeth's condition, and it may have served as another strike against the genetics of the woman he had chosen to have a family with. Conversely, Elizabeth herself is considered by some to be a suspect in the kidnapping. Author Noel Behn, for example, cites evidence that Elizabeth was resentful of her sister's marriage and once hid the baby Charlie in a trash closet. There was apparently enough concern over Elizabeth's treatment of the baby that the parents forbade her to have any contact with Charlie. In addition to being a skilled and innovative aviator in her own right, Anne Morrow Lindbergh also authored a number of memoirs associated with aviation, family life, and the lives of women in the 20th century. In the 1930s, she published 2 volumes dealing with the pioneering aviation experiences she shared with her husband. Written around the same time, but not published until decades later, was a memoir and letter collection titled Hour of Gold, Hour of Lead. Included in that volume were the author's heart-wrenching thoughts on the kidnapping and loss of her first child. In the memoir, she writes poignantly of the moment investigators discovered him and how some of his blonde curls and fluff remained. She did not record any suspicions of who had taken her son, but wrote achingly of her fear that she would forget the details of his face and how it felt when she held him in her arms. Very early in the investigation, Charles Lindbergh encouraged communication between himself, the police, and the kidnappers. A series of handwritten letters and messages published in newspapers was the result, with the kidnapper demanding $50,000 in cash for the safe return of the child. The author of those letters remains disputed to this day, since the man eventually arrested, tried, and convicted of the crime was fluent in German, but the letters suggest the writer might have been a non-German posing as a German. During the first weeks of communication between the parties, Lindbergh and the police demanded a token of proof that the kidnapper indeed had the child. When the seventh letter arrived, the sleeper Charlie was wearing the night of his disappearance came with it. It appeared freshly laundered, which gave rise to more eerie suspicion, but the Lindberghs identified the sleeper as belonging to their missing son. Other items of Charlie's clothing were found on May 12, 1932, when his decomposing body was accidentally discovered in a ditch a mere 4 miles from his home. He was still found wearing his white undershirt, by then heavily stained. So what do you think? Who really kidnapped the Lindbergh baby? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.